Hello, everyone. Today is Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021, and this is the Atlanta FileMaker Developers Group. Our presenter today is Leland Long, and he's going to be showing some video games that he made in FileMaker using JavaScript, and how his experience with this helped him solve some frustrating business problems. So, Leland, we're looking forward to your presentation. Please take it away.
All right. Thank you, David. Share my screen here. Okay. So yeah, as David mentioned, I made 2 video games in FileMaker. Not your typical project in FileMaker for certain, but it led me not only to enjoy creating an interesting product, a video game in FileMaker as a challenge. Obviously, that was not for a customer; that was for myself. I came up with the idea myself. But later in my work projects in FileMaker, which by the way, I'm an in-house full-time FileMaker developer, um, ran into some business solutions that I'll show you here in a little bit. And the experience that I gained from making those 2 video games in FileMaker, integrating some JavaScript, helped me solve a business solution that had I not had that experience, number one, I wouldn't have thought of the solution. And number two, that particular business solution written entirely in FileMaker was a no-go. It was not going to work for staff. It was too slow. So with that, we will move on to some slides. Making a video game in FileMaker. Why? Well, it's fun. It's challenging. I happened to write a book a few years ago, Learn SpriteKit for iOS Game Development. I'm not an iOS game developer expert by any stretch, but I wrote a book. It's a tutorial from start to finish on writing one particular game in SpriteKit for iOS. Had nothing to do with FileMaker, obviously, and it had nothing to do with JavaScript. But I guess I throw that out there to say that I'm an old school game player. I like the old games, the stuff we used to play in the arcades. So when I have a programming challenge, that's the way I tend to think, is especially if I'm training kids or even adults. A programming language, a programming concept, even something in FileMaker, I tend to gravitate towards starting off with a game because it lures people in, because it's fun. There's not a 14-year-old kid out there that I've ever tried to explain programming or FileMaker to that wants to know how to build something in Excel or how to solve an invoicing dilemma or create a report. So games are something that people can relate to. My passion has turned into JavaScript and FileMaker integration. I've become kind of an evangelist on this because what I've heard from the FileMaker community is that when Claris or anyone mentions the word JavaScript, you tend to see fear. You tend to see some apprehension. A lot of that might have to do with the fact that many of us, not all of us, many of us are aging. And so some of us have been around for a while. And it's not uncommon to be talking to FileMaker developers and get a show of hands in a room and find out that over half of the room is around my age bracket, which I'm not young anymore, so I'm willing to admit it. So games in FileMaker. Well, you can throw a web viewer on a layout and bring in any game you want that's out there on the web and call it a game in FileMaker, but that's cheating. That's definitely not what we're trying to accomplish here. You're not going to learn a thing that way. And so, no, we are not just playing JavaScript games in a web viewer for sure. I am going to use someone's advice and stop the slides here and jump into the first game right off the bat, rather than making you wonder and guess and try to figure out what I'm talking about or whether or not it's going to be interesting. So right off the bat, this should hopefully pique your interest, and we will just go right on in and play. Now, what my hands are going to do is I'm going to be using the Z and X keys for left and right movement, and the slash key for the fire key. So with that, I will try not to die right off the bat. Now, what you're seeing is FileMaker handling the entire UI. So every graphical element that you see, and even the sounds, are all being done in FileMaker. So with that, I'm going to let myself be killed here. But you can see the responsiveness, and that was one of the things I was thrilled with when I was building this. Was I made this game back in 2007, and it's kind of clunky, to say the least. But hopefully the audience is looking at that going, well, with a raised eyebrow, that's a little bit more impressive than what I first imagined. And that's why I wanted to share it. I love this concept. I love the idea of using FileMaker, which is not meant to do something like this, and just have the challenge to see if it can be done. And sure enough, it can. And the responsiveness was great. There was a few challenges to run into, obviously, as you do with any programming endeavor. And with that, we'll jump back to slides and just kind of reiterate that what you just saw was FileMaker handling all the graphics, the entire UI. How does it do it? Well, in its entirety, it's virtually just calculated container fields. When I found out that when you have a calculation in FileMaker, when I found out that you can not only return some text or return a number, but when I found out you could return a container, it immediately piqued my interest as far as, oh, well, that kind of changes things. I could return graphics based on a calculation. So that's what I did. JavaScript, where is it? What is it? Well, it's handling the game engine. It's the entire logic of everything that you saw as far as what's on the screen, where it's at, where it moves to, when it moves. All of that is all written in JavaScript. And of course, the middleman, the in-between of how that works in FileMaker is a web viewer. So at the very bottom of the screen was a tiny little box, and that was the web viewer that wasn't showing the user anything, but it was making the integration with JavaScript happen. JSON was the data exchange between FileMaker and JavaScript. As many of you know, or even if you don't, I'll let you know, JSON is an acronym for JavaScript Object Notation. So JSON is native JavaScript, and therefore, when you're using JavaScript with FileMaker's new JSON functions, that's a natural marriage between the two. And the way that that happens is I'm using global variables to pass that information back and forth between the web viewer and FileMaker. And last but not least, I did use one library. I try not to use libraries because it just adds complexity, but hey, some libraries do things that you certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel and rewrite it or do it your own way when somebody else has already figured it out, done all the code, and put it out there for free for everybody to use. So jQuery is a very popular library, and I was playing around with it one day to see what I could do with it in FileMaker, and discovered how lovely it was and how simple it was and very fast and responsive in returning back to me mouse coordinates and keyboard presses, keyboard activity. So that's where I ended up having the idea of, well, that's the perfect keyboard input for a FileMaker game. So that's what I used. Here's what the layout looks like. That tiny little box that the blue arrow is pointing at, there's our web viewer. And down at the bottom, I just have some text as far as what keys do whatever function. If you take a look at that layout, you'll see that it's only made up of a few fields, and they are repeating fields. So pretty much everything on this layout that's making all the magic happen is unstored calcs, repeating fields, and calculated container fields. So those are not your common fields that we use every day in a business solution for sure. But for any of you that have been told, don't use repeating fields, they're bad, let's make them go away. Well, that's true for business logic, but they actually solve many problems in user interfaces, as you may or may not have discovered on your own. That little bit of code on the right is everything that's inside that web viewer as far as the HTML goes. And you also might notice that dead center in that code is some UI. And I put that there experimenting with this game on FileMaker Go. It's a little clunky, but it does work. And what this HTML does is it presents 3 buttons that you can press at the bottom of FileMaker Go, since you don't have any keyboard access at that point. Here's our relationships within the game. 3 tables, all related by nothing but a Cartesian join. So nothing fancy or complicated there. And here's all the fields. So not a lot of fields. You can see the repetitions. You can see they're all unstored. And if we look at just one calc, mostly what you're looking at is a case statement that returns three things, either nothing, or it returns the player's ship, or the player's ship that's exploded. So this is for that single row at the bottom that handles all the player graphics. Here's the global variables if you look at it in the data viewer. And this is one variable, and it's an array that holds all of the data for the enemies, as far as where they are, where their bullets are, whether they're firing, whether they've been killed. So again, this is the data exchange between JavaScript and FileMaker. Not really too much going on there. I mean, it looks kind of busy, but if you look at each one of those elements, for anyone that's used JSON and can glance at that and kind of figure out, oh, okay, yeah, I see what's there. It's not too complicated. And here's what the JavaScript looks like. This is just a segment of it. And the basic thing I want you to take away from this is if you look at the way that I've written this JavaScript in here, it's JavaScript 101. It's not JavaScript Advanced or 201 or 301. If any of you have met Jeremy is a evangelist for JavaScript in FileMaker. He's done a lot of videos. He's done some classes. He's trying to promote JavaScript as well. To be fair to Jeremy, I would say that he's very intelligent. He's done great things. But what I find, especially in talking with other people, is that he's very smart and he's very advanced and he does great things with JavaScript and FileMaker. But it makes it rather tricky for someone that knows nothing about it to watch or to listen to Jeremy and figure out what he's talking about, because he's steps ahead of where we are or where I am when I listen to him. So when I met Jeremy, I told him kind of playfully that I kind of consider myself a JavaScript 101 teacher, and he makes a great JavaScript 201 teacher. So start simple and then pass it off to Jeremy, and he'll show you some amazing stuff to do with JavaScript in FileMaker. But if you look at this code, there's nothing that's there that's really not a FileMaker concept already. You'll notice a switch statement, which is the same in FileMaker as a case statement. You can see if then. You can see a function, which in FileMaker would be a script, a subscript. You can see some parameters going into that script. If you see a player dot position X, that's pulling a JSON element out of another element, which in FileMaker you would have a function for that. The thing that might be kind of confusing is that plus equals 1. That actually is a shortcut for the same thing that we do in a loop, where we say loop index equals index plus 1, same concept. So basically the takeaway I want you to see from this example here is that if you start simple, if you do JavaScript in FileMaker and you do JavaScript 101, you've already learned half of it if you're a good FileMaker developer. That's what I would want you to take away from that. So don't be scared of the fact that JavaScript looks different, sounds different, and in its basic form, it has a lot of similarities to what you've already learned in FileMaker. Here's the list of FileMaker scripts within the project, and the one that's currently highlighted on the left is the one that takes all of the hand-coded JavaScript and pushes it into a web viewer, along with all the sounds, which were base64 encoded if you're curious. All right, you've already seen the demo. So enough of Space Invaders. Let's move on. That's just a recap of everything we just covered. Let's move on to the next project. Looks like we're doing pretty good on time. We're a quarter after the hour. Go bigger or go home. So after making Space Invaders and it was nice and responsive, my first thought was, well, that was fun. What's next? So here's what was next. Let's go bigger. Let's see if we can push this a wee bit. So in a screen real estate area of 750 by 1,000 pixels, that's the area of our layout that we're going to make this second game in. Let's do 75 rows of 65 columns, and let's space them 10 pixels apart, all overlapping, all transparent. If you do your math, that's a lot of containers. That's close to 5,000 container fields in a 750 by 1,000 layout. Yes, that is busy. Yes, that is crazy. So in order to place all of those exactly in the same spot, I will take the fear away from you and tell you that I did not spend 10 hours manually pushing all of these things around on the screen. It actually took me about an hour to create. How the heck did I do that? Well, Matt Petrowski gave me an idea on one of his videos quite a while ago, which was if you copy item or items on a layout, if you actually go look at the data that's sitting on the clipboard, ignoring the fact that you can go to another layout and paste it, if you look at what's actually the data that's actually on the clipboard on the machine, you'll notice that it's a lot of XML information on everything that you copied. And that includes everything that you would find in the inspector. So for these particular containers, what is it that I want to do? Well, I just need to make one row and space them all out exactly like I want, all 65 of them, 10 pixels apart. Now, as I note here on the slide, on the last entry there, each container has to have a unique name. So you can see my naming scheme down there, canvas.y75.65. That shows you that that is row 75, column 65, and each one has to have that unique name. That's because if you thought about that game back in Space Invaders and this one here that has 5,000 containers, to refresh the entire window is very expensive. You don't want to do that. So I refresh just specific objects, so I have to know the unique name of where each object is. So that makes it nice and responsive. So once I had the first row placed exactly like I wanted it to and copied it onto the clipboard, I then used a utility that allowed me to look at that XML on the clipboard, import it into a script, and tell the script, hey, make me a new row with this X and Y location, space them out 10 pixels apart, and give them these dynamic names. Tell it to run, and it'll create a second. And when it's done, what I've got is manipulated XML data in the clipboard. Now all I have to do is paste it and move it where I want. And suddenly I now have a second row that was created by script. Slick, nice, neat trick. And so to do 75 rows took an hour, and most of that hour was waiting for the script to finish all of that calculations of massaging all that XML to do exactly what I needed it to do. But the end result was a very complex layout that was mostly designed by script. Neat trick. So again, just 3 tables. Got a few more fields than we had for Space Invaders. Again, all of them unstored repeating fields. About the same amount of scripts as before. And again, none of the scripts have anything to do with the game logic or the engine. And again, I use jQuery for the keyboard input. Here's what the layout looks like. That's one busy layout, you have to admit. I can't see all of your shaking heads, so all I can do is guess that you're just looking at this thinking that I'm crazy. And yeah, maybe I am. So down at the bottom, we have a little bit bigger of a web viewer this time. Not necessary, but mostly that's one of the gotchas, is that if you're doing keyboard import inputs while the JavaScript is running and your FileMaker graphics are scripts are firing off all of the time and things are busy, that web viewer has to keep focus. So if you accidentally click outside that web viewer and put focus somewhere else or on nothing, you will lose keyboard input. So that is a gotcha for this particular project. So there's the web viewer down there. And again, it's not providing any UI. I have a little graphic down there that shows A and Z for up and down, comma and period for left and right. And at the top, there's some custom boxes for the score, for the player score. And using, instead of text or a number in a field, I'm using custom graphics to replicate the original game. The single row calculation gets a little bit more complicated. Basically what's happening is that's a case statement. And over on the right, it's just determining which graphic to show. So as you can see, there's quite a few more graphics as a possibility this time. Here's a sample of the JavaScript. Again, JavaScript 101, simple stuff, nothing too complicated. Another thing you might notice is my naming of variables. That to me is something I like to preach to any developer, whether they're FileMaker or not, which is I get really irritated looking at custom functions and scripts and people are using acronyms for variable names, or worse yet, variable I, variable X, variable Y, variable Z. You can't hand that off to a junior developer and expect them to learn from your code. I think I probably got this idea from iOS development, where Apple has preached for a long time, use long variable names so that that variable or that function name tells you just by the naming scheme itself what it's doing and what its purpose is. So I really preach that all over the place, and you'll see that used here. No acronyms for those variables. I might use an I for an index or something occasionally, but I try to stay away from that. All right. Hopefully you're all sitting there eagerly anticipating and waiting for what this game ended up being. Well, I hope this doesn't let you down. So this is a quick explanation of the same thing you saw on the slides. And with that, we will introduce you to Blinky and Pinky and Inky and Clyde. Hopefully this looks realistic so far. And again, you're inside FileMaker. Let's hit play. This little pop-up progress window is only serving one function, and that is to load this layout in FileMaker. It takes a while to load 5,000 container fields. So with that, I hope you see that this is nice and responsive. And I don't have collisions in yet, but you'll notice I do have pellet gobbling down, and each monster, when they move, their eyes change for the direction they're going. I do have the power pellet working. So there's a few things I have working, but not everything. Don't have any bonuses right here. The score is changing up top. Don't have any collisions yet. But the game does stop when you eat up all the pellets. And the walls are working. Now, while this is running, I will ask you as a developer, with what you've seen so far, challenges that you run into with game development can be as tricky, if not even trickier, than a business problem that you run into developing a business solution for a client, which is, how do I handle walls and pellets? Again, I've got tons of containers here that this little guy can run around in, but how do I stop him at a wall? How do I stop the monsters at a wall? How do I show a pellet? How do I make it? I mean, making the pellet might not be challenging, but I mean, you have to have some sort of variable storage to keep track of all this stuff, right? So that is an interesting challenge, and to figure out how to solve that was not quick, and there there was some thinking going on. So let's look at a few of those things. So here's the graphics table. So you can see we had quite a few more graphics to pick from than we did from Space Invaders. You can see that custom score digits down there at the bottom. And here's how I solved the pellets table issue. I used a bitmap, a very old developing type concept. Now, yeah, I don't know. I don't hear it used much in today's development world, especially not for games. Maybe way down under the hood, but I don't know if you could find a young developer that could tell you what a bitmap is or how to use it or when you would want to use it. I'm certainly not a bitmap expert, but you can see down below there, that's FileMaker data. And if you look closely, all it is zeros and ones. And what that is that every time you see a one, that particular container on the screen has a pellet in it. So what I do is I create two records that both look identical when you start the game. And the second record is the current player's level of pellets. And when he runs over one, change the one to a zero. Now it doesn't show up on the screen. And now you have basically a matrix or a bitmap here. And you can do a counter too, since you know how many pellets you start off with. And so when the counter gets down to zero, you know that the level is complete. But then what I do to start a second level is either just wipe out that player's record that's now all zeros, and or however I wish, replace it with that first record, which is kind of the template of where all of the pellets are. So that's how I solve that, and I do the same type of thing for walls. So I thought that was a really neat solution, elegant solution for a very challenging concept for this particular game. So like I already mentioned, it's not quite finished. It was starting to feel a little sluggish the more graphics I was adding and so on and so forth, but I did manage to get myself a newer, faster laptop, and boy, it doesn't feel sluggish now. So I very well might continue finishing this game at some point. Still need some collision handlers. There's a nice long list of things here of things yet to do. And we're approaching the bottom of the hour, so I want to move on to the next process, which is our business scheduling solution. All right. So let me start off here by showing you a slide of how this business solution came about and what it was trying to solve. This is a Google Doc used by our staff, many of our staff. And this was a document that they invented, somebody invented, and then they've been passing it around to various offices and various staff are using it. And what it is it's scheduling. My particular industry that I work for is a flooring company here in Charleston, South Carolina. And we manage subcontractors. So we don't actually do the work ourselves, but our job is to work with our primary vendor, which is Lowe's. And we're the primary installer for flooring in the southeast of the US, including Atlanta. Um, our company actually started in Atlanta, which is where all you fine folks are. So when it comes to scheduling, what I did years ago when I was fairly fresh with the company, I've been with them 8 or 9 years now. Um, Zulu had come out, the plugin for FileMaker that um, was looked like it was a combination between Todd Geist and Seed Code and 360. Where I'm not sure exactly. I'm not trying to insult him here, but I don't remember who exactly created the thing. But what it was, if none of you are familiar with it, is it was a way to integrate iCal with FileMaker, and I think Google Calendar as well. So I mean, these people are trying to schedule jobs. And so, man, if they could see the jobs on their iCal, which all of them are using Macs in the office anyway, that would be really cool. So I purchased a copy, built the thing, got it running, showed it off, and I was a little disappointed at the reaction because it was cool to see all of their scheduled jobs in iCal. And if you look at each one of these cells, they have some custom codes that they have that mean something to them. It's all, abbreviated acronym, slimmed down version of what they want to know. And that's what's going on with all the wild colorization as well. All of those mean something to them. And so when they were looking at this particular thing inside iCal and they could click on it and it would show them even more information on the job. And I even made a link in there to where they could click on the link and it would take them into FileMaker, into the actual invoice of that job. I thought that was the coolest thing since sliced bread. And they thought it was kind of cool too. But looking at this particular type of data in a standard calendar was useless to them. And that was the end result. So my Zulu project has ever since collected dust, um, and it was just a lot of work for nothing, and it was a little disappointing. But the reason is to explain the reason, and the way that it was explained to me is that a general calendar view, each of the cells represents a separate day within a month. Or if you change views, each row represents a different hour of a single day or a week or however you're viewing it. But as you can see here, they've got days of the week going across the top, in this case 27 through 30. But on the left-hand side is where things really, really have to change. What they're putting down on the left side is their list of installers separated by surface type. So you can see that purple line going across the center. Above that is one surface type, below that is another surface type, and those different crews do different surfaces. That's their specialty. That's what they do. And then going across, you can see in blue with the words off, those are particular days that particular crew or installer has requested off or needs to be off. So they're unavailable for that slot. So when our staff is on the phone with a customer talking about possibly scheduling them for this particular week, they're looking for holes. They're looking for holes in this chart. And then each particular job might be 1 day, might be 2 days, might take an entire week to do. So they're looking for a range of holes to be able to put this information into. And so all of this different colorization and coding means something to them. And that's why trying to look at this in a standard calendar view was just not going to work. Fast forward several years, I created a solution in FileMaker that replicated this. And I thought I was doing a whiz-bang job. I was using virtual list. I was using ESS to do data lookups. And there was a long list of things that they wanted it to do as far as colors and what it meant and the different codes. And when you clicked on one, it would show you the invoice data and it would have some more checkbox. I made it do everything they wanted it to do. Got all done with the thing after a few months, was playing around with it with a beta test group. And they liked it. It did what they wanted, but it was too dang slow. They would move. I could only show them so many days at a time. So they would click the button that would take them to the next week. And then they'd get this spinning beach ball of hell. And they would sit there and they would wait tapping their fingers with impatience. And you can imagine if they're on the phone with a customer, you don't want to wait longer than a couple seconds. Well, sometimes this thing was taking 10 seconds to refresh. And then if it doesn't show them what they want to see and they have to click that forward or back button again and they have to wait another 10, 15 seconds. Yeah, no, it was not making anybody very impressed with me at all. So again, for the second time, I was a little downcast and upset that here we were doing everything they wanted it to do, but it still was not usable. So JavaScript into the picture. And I knew that, hey, with some JavaScript integrations, maybe I could relook at this project that's been collecting dust and maybe figure out a way of trying again for the third time. So I knew there was Kanban boards out there, and one of the project files that programs that we use at work quite extensively is oh, what's that thing called? Got it sitting here, Jamp for Jira. I think it's Jira. It's a Kanban board, and one of the things that really appeals to my project manager is the ability to drag and drop. So he's often said, man, it sure would be nice if we could have that scheduling tool with some drag and drop and people could just drop stuff in there. Oh, that'd be really cool. So when FileMaker started coming with built-in add-ons, when was that? Version 18, 19, somewhere fairly recent. I played around with their Kanban add-on board, but it didn't quite look and feel like I wanted. And when I did a little searching for other Kanban options, I stumbled across this one over at 360 Works. And they have a JavaScript package that's free called Carafe.fm. Some of you might be familiar with it, but I looked at this Kanban board, played with it in FileMaker, and I liked it a lot better. So what I decided is, hey, I'm going to use this as a starting point. I'm going to drop this into FileMaker, and I'm just going to start playing. I'm going to try to change this, change that, try to see if we can get it to do really what I want it to do. And here's what it started looking like. And what I will do is quickly switch over to a live demo. And here's what it looks like currently. And if I make this a little bigger, now this is pretty much 99% all WebViewer. This is all JavaScript. This is that Kanban board, and this is me playing around with code under the hood, trying to see what I can do. So we have some nice functionality like that in FileMaker through a web viewer, which you can't do on a FileMaker native layout. But I had to really play some tricks because a Kanban board is not meant to read across a row like a spreadsheet does. And so by default, it has varying heights, and that was not going to work for me. So I had one of the things I had to change in here was making it so that it would take 3 lines of data only. Whether it was empty, whether there was 1 line of data, 2 or 3, I needed them all to be the same height. So that was a trick I had to play with. It scrolls nicely up and down, so I can have, you can start to see down here, I've got something screwing up here. I don't have my heights lined up again. So what boogered it up? It was right here. This one and this one has 4 lines, and so it pushed everything and skewed everything. So again, this is not a finished project yet. Ooh, this one even has 5 lines in it. So obviously it's going to take some more tweaking and a lot more work, but it's got a really nice start. And at this point, this is kind of a proof of concept. And at this point, project managers and executive levels at the company are like, yeah, it looks like you got something good going on. Go ahead and keep working on it. So I have been, and this is what we have so far, but this is where I ran into a problem. Let me show you a few more tricks before I move on to what that problem was. Because this is a web viewer, because this is all HTML at its root, because it has CSS, look at this nice option. I can, on the fly, very quickly change color schemes, because I don't know about you guys, but if you ever have to deal with a client, or if you're an in-house developer, you have to deal with decision makers, one of the things I constantly run into is, I don't like that color. And so you go back to, hopefully you've got some sort of theme going on where you can go through and quickly kind of change things and try to make them happy. But I love this option of presenting them with, at least in this case, 5 different colors. And it's like, okay, if you don't like orange, go pick blue. And it's nice and responsive. Another problem I'm going to run into is screen sizes. Matter of fact, I'm getting ready. They're going to want 2 more columns on this thing. And you can already see I've got a lot of data squeezed into a really narrow cell going on here. And if they have a smaller screen size, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So one of the ways I solve that is, hey, let's make adjustable font sizes. So if you can read it, great. If you can't read it, go ahead and increase the size. But that allows the user to start having some control and some preferences that can make it so that hopefully I can try to keep the most amount of people happy, which is of course always the challenge. All right, so what problem did I run into? I think I will show you part of the problem over here on a slide, which is right here. On the far left, again, this is all three of these are all JSON. On the far left is the data I'm getting back when I query our system using the FileMaker Data API, which of course returns me JSON, which is what I want. I'm working with JavaScript. I'm in a web viewer. I'm working with a JavaScript library. Everything's going to be JavaScript. Everything's going to be JSON. So on the left is some sample data that I'm getting back in that project using FileMaker's Data API. That's great, but that does not immediately translate to what this library Kanban board needs. What it needs is this data here in the center. And if you just take a quick glance, there's a huge difference. It's it's the same data, most of the same data, not all of it, but it's in a completely different format. Over on the right is the finalized JSON that actually gets rendered for the Kanban board. But right now in my scripts and in the library, the conversion from box number 2 to box number 3 here is quick, easy, and it's already working. And it's fast, it works just fine. The problem is the speed of converting column number 1 here to column number 2. So while I was building this, I was using test data, of course, and the test data was lovely and it was fast and everything was working slick. And I went to demo this thing. And during the demo, or right before the demo, I decided, well, we need to switch to live data. So when I switched to live data, sure enough, what you're looking at right here is live data from our database for November 1st through the 5th. And for the Charleston office. And you can see they got a pretty good list of installers on the left, and everything in blue is actual jobs scheduled. And if I click on one of these, it actually shows me the live data for the actual customer, which is nice. What's really nice is seeing 2 jobs side by side. That's 2 FileMaker records side by side. So the way that I make this magic happen is all of those fields are actually global fields populated by script. And if we have 3 for the day, yes, it shows 3 invoices side by side for the day. Nice and slick. And each one of those links actually works. If I click on that, it'll open up the standard invoicing window for that particular job. So all of this is live data, which is great. And the FileMaker Data API query sends me back the results very quickly. The problem was that conversion from FileMaker's data to what was actually needed. And when I ran this in demo mode with live data to my project manager and a few other people, and again, this is on a WAN. This is a server in Atlanta, and we have 30 offices scattered out all over the southeast quadrant of the US, all of them connected to FileMaker through that FileMaker server. The load time was about 30 to 45 seconds. It was awful. And I was right back to the problem that I'd had before, which was, oh crap, it doesn't matter how beautiful this is. It doesn't matter how many things I do that's on their want list. This is unusable. This is not something that anyone is going to tolerate, sitting here and waiting for a spinning beach ball and for data to load every time they hit that refresh for a 20 to 40 second data load. It ain't going to happen. So I went home, dejected again, but I did have an epiphany in the middle of that demo. And my epiphany was that conversion that I had written in FileMaker that was converting the data on the left to the data in the center. If you were to look at the script, which was really lengthy, I'd done 3 versions of it already to try to make it as efficient as possible. It was all set variables and loops. And there was nothing going on that was FileMaker related. There was no context. There was no switching layouts. There was no related data getting in the way. There was no relationships getting in the way. There was no unstored calcs getting in the way. It was nothing but JSON manipulation in variables. And so it was all in memory. But it was so much data to chunk through, and it was such a process to go through to convert it from this side to this side, that my query, I noticed, was taking 1 to 2 seconds, and the processing was where all of that time was being taken. So my epiphany in the demo was, what if I used the same skills that I did over in the 2 video games? What if I converted that process, just that process by itself, to JavaScript in a web viewer? What would that do? So I did. And now this is a live screen in front of you. This is live data for this week in Charleston. This is a lot of invoices. That's a lot of data coming back from the data API. In the top, I'm going to hit the refresh button. And in the top center of this, hopefully you can see it, will show you a status. And you'll see a status of like, I don't know, let's just hit refresh and see what we get. And if we start kind of a counter, it's 35 seconds after the hour. Go. Done. What was that? 2 seconds? 3 seconds maybe at the most? Yes, that's how dramatic this solution became after converting just that portion from FileMaker over to JavaScript. We went from 30 to 40 seconds to holy crapiola, that's fast. Now this is a solution we can continue to develop. This is a solution that is totally usable. There's not a user out there that's going to be sad waiting for 3 seconds. And of course, they'll probably never know that originally it was taking about 45 seconds. So what do I got left on slides here? Anything? Nope, that's the last slide. About the only thing I could do at this point would be to actually show you some of the scripts, but that's kind of pointless. Maybe what I'll do, if I can find it here, I did not bring it up. Let's see if I can show you at least some of it. Where's my Kanban folder? It's probably up here, somewhat alphabetized. Bear with me, I didn't come prepared to do this. We're just kind of winging it now. Here we go. Here's, I think this is just the, this is the main script that handles just the Kanban and the JavaScript. So not too lengthy here, but what we'll do, got a couple libraries being loaded in line here, Bootstrap, jQuery, Bootstrap, Carafe, Kanban.js. Okay, so there's the Kanban library.js. Here's my custom JavaScript in FileMaker that did all of that magic. So I'll just kind of quickly zip through here and you'll see the content kind of lengthy, but I mean, this was replacing, my goodness, lots of lines in FileMaker, but it was basically a one-to-one conversion. There was a few things that you have to change to do it in JavaScript rather than FileMaker, but I mean, look at some of these lines. What's an example? I mean, here's a set variable in FileMaker. Here's an if statement in FileMaker. Here's a loop. It's the do loop right here that starts here and it goes down to here. So there's a do loop. There's several different types of loop you can do depending upon whether you want it to run once or not even run once if it fails the test. Here's a variable that's creating a JavaScript object, which would be the same as creating a single JSON element over in FileMaker with several elements in it. Here's a complicated calculation. Not really. Quantity plus furniture plus steps plus type plus a parenthesis. So I'm creating a text blob there. So, I mean, this is JavaScript 101. This is basic stuff. And all I did is I already had the business logic all figured out in FileMaker. The script ran fine. It did everything it was supposed to do. It was just too dang slow. And so when I created all of this code, it was taking a FileMaker script and converting it into JavaScript line by line. This was completely done in an evening and went from a 45-second load, 30-second load to a 3-second load. So if that's not phenomenal success, I don't know what is. That's a 10-fold increase. And if I could encourage anybody out there that's a FileMaker developer, has never done JavaScript in their life, is sitting on the fence wondering, do I want to learn JavaScript? I'm telling you, this is just one more tool that even if you are not going to become a JavaScript advanced user, if you just become a JavaScript 101 user, you could do this. And this is a tool that can be an immense benefit for anybody that's a FileMaker developer. So that's it for my presentation. Maybe David can come back on and tell me whether or not there's a chat window or if anybody's got questions or what we want to do at this point. But I thank you for paying attention to me so far. And what's next, David? I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, if anyone wants to ask questions, now is a good time to do it. You can unmute yourselves and then you'll be able to ask a question. I don't know if anyone said anything.
Crickets.
Give them another minute.
So David, what was your take while we're waiting for anybody else to pipe in?
I strongly agree with you. JavaScript is getting to be an essential skill for FileMaker developers. We've worked on a number of solutions with clients, even just for interface features, where you can't do it in native FileMaker, and JavaScript allows you to make a really rich interactive UI that you just couldn't do any other way. So even just basic things where you can find an existing library and do an implementation of it, or maybe you want to embed a map like from Google Maps, and you can use their JavaScript API for that. It's only a few lines of code to put a nice map in with markers in specific places and look up addresses and things like that. You can get a lot, and you don't have to be that advanced. And JSON's been part of FileMaker for a good number of years now, so people should be familiar, at least basically familiar with that for FileMaker purposes, and you're just going to see more of that in JavaScript. So,
right,
not a big deal.
So, give me your take. Let's start with Space Invaders. What was your first thought?
Well, I've seen people do games sometimes in FileMaker, and I was like, I don't know why you would spend the time doing this.
Fair enough.
But
fair enough.
I think what you brought up here, and the reason, the value that you said that is in here, is it gave you a lot of experience with JavaScript, and you can't learn just from playing. You have to have a goal. Mm-hmm. And I think you had a goal, and you started experimenting with all these other tools, and it helped you build an important skill set that helped you solve a real business problem. So it's great.
Well said. Well said. And what did you think of Pac-Man? Was that unexpected? I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was making it, I was anticipating the worst of just chunky refreshes and just blockiness or running good for a little bit and then pausing.
The frame rate's a little different on here, but it was a little slower through the screen sharing.
Oh,
but,
bummer.
Right. Yeah, I'm believing you that it was running very smoothly. Yep.
Oh, it was absolutely no hiccups whatsoever. It was just smooth as silk. A knife through butter.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing I could point out is, let me go back to a screen share here. Are we back? Does it look good?
Yep.
Okay. PentagonFM. Don't know if anybody out there has heard of it. I was led to it when I was asking some questions on some various Discord and Slack channels as far as, hey, the Claris marketplace for add-ons is all nice, but it seems to be for partners only. So what about some of us guys, solo developers like myself, that are not paying Claris a monthly or yearly fee? Is there any options for us getting on the marketplace? And they're probably over time may or may not ever happen, which is fine. But when I was asking around as far as what anybody else thought, I was told, hey, have you discovered PentagonFM? And I said, no. So I went and checked it out, and you can see it here on the screen. I'm not sure who started it, but it's a third party, totally open to anybody. It's add-ons, plugins, and demo files for the rest of us. So with that, I've uploaded my entire catalog, of which I've got a few plugins in here. One of them is JSON array sort, which allows you to take a JSON payload that you get back like from another vendor that comes in a manner that's unsorted, and sometimes you want to pre-sort that before you do it in FileMaker. This all happens with JavaScript in a web viewer, and it's a FileMaker add-on. So you plug in the array, you tell it the path of the element you want to sort by, you tell it ascend or descend, you can pick a number, a text field, a date field, and it will sort the entire array by that particular element. So that's really cool. I've got another add-on here called JSON diff, and that takes two JSON bodies and presents you with the differences. So that was very useful for us. We do a lot of API calls to outside vendors. I'm always getting JSON results back that are huge. Sometimes there's just maybe one thing that's changed, and it could be in a million lines of JSON. So this literally goes through very, very quickly and shows you just the differences. I did add Space Invaders here as a demo file. I wanted to make it an add-on, but there was some technical difficulties and it was 95% working. So I scratched that and just sent the entire unlocked Space Invaders file here that anybody can grab at their heart's content. And not only play Space Invaders, but even more important, like David pointed out, you can go into it and actually look at all the JavaScript, the scripting, the everything. It's completely unlocked. So you can tear it apart and learn from it if that's feasible. And last but not least, I put in some eye candy a couple of weeks ago. Matrix Digital Rain. It looks gorgeous. If you love the movie Matrix, you'll understand what that concept is. And I've seen a few reviews of a few people that have downloaded it, and they said, that's the best add-on I ever saw. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that all my add-ons? No, I have one more add-on. It starts with a W, so it's on the next page. These are all alphabetical. There we are. What's my latency? This is an add-on, so you can add this to your solution. And when you click on the test, you can pre-configure ahead of time which servers you want to test up from 1 to 4 servers. Make one of them your FileMaker server, make the other ones other FileMaker servers, but have at least one that's to an outside company like Google or Apple or Amazon or somebody big whose web servers are always up. And this will show you your latency. And so it's a really good diagnostic tool to figure out when your customer or your client calls you saying, my FileMaker speed sucks right now. You can go have them test the latency, tell you what the results are, and you can determine whether or not the problem is with their internet because it's slow to Google and Amazon and it's the same exact speed to your FileMaker solution. Or you might discover that, hey, Amazon and Google are pinging nice and fast, but my FileMaker server is pinging some extreme latency. Now you know where the problem lies. So a couple of useful plugins there that I've added, a few more that other people have added, but I would really like to encourage and promote people to go check out PentagonFM.
All right, well, I think that's great. I guess if you have any other questions, anyone in here, if you want to ask something, now's the time to do it. But otherwise, thank you very much. I think that was very informative. That was a great example of using JavaScript in all those FileMaker solutions.
Excellent. Looks like Todd has unmuted himself. You have something, Todd?
I wanted to applaud you. It's a great job. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. Accolades are appreciated.
Yep. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. Thanks, Leland, for doing the presentation. I just want to take this time to remind everyone that our meetings are on the first Wednesday of each month at 7 p.m. Eastern. We always have a video meeting link that you can join, so you don't have to be in Atlanta for this. We're always looking for presenters, so if you have anything that you'd like to share, or you know anyone who you've seen do a presentation before, you think that would be good for the group, or there's a topic that you want to hear more about, please send me an email. Let me know. David@bluefeathergroup.com. We're always looking for presenters, and so any suggestions you have are really appreciated. And I think that's it for today. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.